In this lecture, we'll have a look at pre-request scripts, and as the name implies, this is a script that is run before the request actually is sent. And from a perspective, pre-request scripts are pretty similar to test scripts, except that they run before the request is executed, and obviously because there is no response, you cannot write any tests in the pre-request script, so you cannot make any assertions there. And you can use pre-request scripts for a lot of things, but generally they are used to sort of make your request dynamic. So you can compute something before the request has been executed. So for example, in the pre-request script, you can calculate a timestamp or do a computation or generate some random data or anything that you may then want to use inside the request. And then you generate this information in the pre-request script, set it to a variable, and then when you're making the request, you have access to that variable, and then you can run the request, and then after that run the test. So this is how the normal workflow looks like. So first the pre-request script is executed, then the HTTP request is being made, and after that the tests are being executed. So for our use case here with the boards, what would be, for example, nice to have is a new board name. So every time we submit this request, it would be nice here to have a different board name. And let's imagine that we want to have a board name that contains a number. So for example, my new board 123. And to have this dynamic information there, we can use a pre-request script to generate this value so that we're able to use it there. So for that, I will switch to the pre-request script. And the first thing that we want to do is to simply set an environment variable. Of course, we can use a global variable, but now we learned about environment variables. So let's go ahead and use an environment variable. So from the snippet panel here, which you can see doesn't have so many snippets as the test panel, we can simply set an environment variable. Let's simply call it board name. And because we are right at the beginning, I'm gonna set simply a value here. So let's say here my new board 234. Okay. And of course, simply setting this environment variable doesn't change a lot, but let's send this request first. That way, the request has been sent. We can inspect the environment variables, and you will see here my new board 234. So we know that this piece of code now it's working, but we haven't used it yet, because if we look at the response, you will still see my new board 123. So in order to use that variable, pretty similar to any other variables that we use so far, all we have to do is type in board name. We'll get a value. And now the board has been set with the desired value. So now we understand how we can pass information from the pre-request script to the request that's being executed. And this is the first step. Now, this information is still more or less hard-coded because we're not setting it in the request builder, we're setting it in the pre-request script. Still not so great. So what we can do is to take advantage of JavaScript, because this is the language that we are using to write the scripts and the tests. And JavaScript has a cool function called random. And this is part of the math object. So we can say something like math random. And this will generate a random number between 0 and 1. So it will be a very small number. So we'll multiply that by a larger number, for example, 10,000. Looks good. And because we want to have an integer, I'm going to use here parse int. And this will take this one and make it a very nice integer that we can use. So let's see on how our board actually now looks like. And you see here that we have board name and we only have this number, so we still need to type in my board name. Just to know, in variables you can even use stuff like that. So you can use here my board name and combine it with this information. So it's totally possible to do it that way as well. And just to show you that it's working, my board name, and this is it. But let's keep it simple. We are computing everything in a pre-request script. I'm gonna delete that. Let's put it here, my board name, as a string. And I'm concatenating it with the output from parseInt. Okay, we still need a space here. So everything looks good. Now, in case what you're doing in JavaScript is a bit more complex, you do not have to put everything here on a single line inside this set, especially because this can make debugging a bit more complicated, so we don't need this extra complexity. So we can simply say here, define a new variable, let's call it const board name. And this will be available only in JavaScript and only inside the script here. We define this variable board name, and you can use it here. Perfect. And just in case you think that things are even more complicated, I'll highly advise you to define your own function. So you can say here something like function get, you can say here something like function get random board name. You can define your own function here. And what this function can do is it can return something like this. And then you will know exactly what this piece of code is doing. Of course, you can call it here and use it there, or you can even call it directly here. It really depends on what you want to do or how you want to do it. Or you can even define here board name as a constant. Say here, for example, console.log, in case you want to do a bit of debugging or something doesn't work as you think it should work. Let's put it here. And then you can say return board name. So there are a lot of ways on how you can organize your code, either by defining variables, writing your own functions. My general advice is to try to be as organized as possible inside your pre-request script or even in your test script. Try to give it a proper name, use function, organize code so that you can then easily understand what exactly is this pre-request script doing in this case. So let's give it another try to see if everything is still working as we think it should work. And the board name was properly generated, so there's no problem with that. You see here that we have some tests that are failing. And the test that is failing is that it's asserting that my board name with a number equals my new board. So we need to change that a bit. Let's call it my board, just to be consistent. And of course here we need to put something else. So we need to fetch this information from the environment variable. So let's grab the snippet for getting an environment variable. Let's paste it right here. And now that this is board name. Okay, run it again. And all the tests are now successful. So this is one use case where you can use pre-request scripts to generate some random information that you will need on your request. And in this case, we managed to generate a random name every time we create a board, and still all our tests are working just fine.